Greetings again, non-Western art appreciation class. I hope you're doing fantastically well. Today we're going to go through Buddhism 101, the origins and the history of Buddhism leading us up into the modern world and the different practices. In the background, you will hear a Buddhist lovely piece of music talking about this symbol of which is the energy of the universe as it shows up. And today we'll be talking about why studying Buddhism, kind of beginning with this process. It is one of the oldest religions in world history, still practiced, and one of the most widely accepted practices around the world. When we do studies, it's somewhere fifth or sixth in the most common religions on the planet today, with somewhere around 7% of practitioners of any religion being Buddhist. And it is one of the fastest growing religions, specifically here in the United States, with this sense of spirituality that's showing up. Now, as we look at Buddhism around the population around the world, the darker the pink here, the more Buddhism is actually dominant within this particular area. And so it really is centered in Asia. Buddhism does begin in this pink mass, if you remember from last time, in Hinduism. This is actually India, with a fair amount of Buddhists that are actually in China as well, and in Tibet and Tibet over here, Mongolia, and in Japan. Notice the United States, when we look at the percent of the population that declare they're Buddhist, we are in about the 1 to 5%, getting closer to the 5 to 15% though, and it is a growing religion here in the United States. Now, one of the things that Buddhism challenges and asks us to ask ourselves about is what is the meaning of life? And so you'll see that word, we'll use that a couple times, a Buddhist koan or koan, and that is the idea of an impossible riddle, a metaphysical way that we look at the world. And so is the meaning of life friends, wisdom, career, love, family, wealth, health, a combination of them, making different one line up? Is it fame and fortune? What is the meaning of life? And this is one of the great questions that show up that Buddhism forces us to ask, because what is happiness becomes one of the questions for a Buddhist koan. Can a dog have a Buddha nature? Can a dog also be a Buddha and be searching for friends, be searching for wisdom, be searching for health, wealth, and fame? And so the Dalai Lama, the 14th one, said, the meaning of life is happiness. Hard question is not what is meaning of life. No, hard question is what make happiness? This is question all human beings must try to answer. What make true happiness? I was very fortunate when I worked at the Field Museum to actually have lunch with the Dalai Lama one day. This is many years ago. And so he was there giving a public lecture, and the person who was going to introduce him actually became ill and so couldn't join us for lunch. So a very small group of individuals sat around, and it was amazing that one of the leaders of the free world, one of the great spiritual gurus and leaders in the history of the world, was sitting amongst us, and he kept asking us and wanted to know about our lives and probing into, are we happy? What do we do for fun? How do we define happiness? He really was very interested in our experience of the world as Americans, as very busy Americans having jobs and going to college. It was a spectacular experience. So what is the meaning of life? How important is happiness for you? How important is your career? Remember, because if your career, you might love your career, but if you're working all the time, are you truly happy? How important is wealth? The ideal amount of money supposedly in the United States to live and be happy is $120,000 for a family of two. You have disposable income that you can go on vacation. You don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. You could put some money away for retirement, but that supposedly is the happiest amount of money. Here's the ironic part. People that make less than that are a little bit less happy on average in the United States. No surprise, they have to make decisions about where and what they can do. Ironically, people who make more money than this are less happy as well, on average. Now, yes, they might have more money to do whatever they want, but generally to get that money, they have to work a lot harder and give up other things, like their time. And so how important is family and parenting? How important is travel? As you think through these, remember, you can't make everything a priority. You must prioritize what is most important for you. So in my own experience, I've struggled with this and take assessment about every few years about where I am, what I am. My career is exceptionally important to me. My family and parenting are exceptionally, and my wife is exceptionally important for me. That means in many parts of life, I have prioritized my work career, my children, and my wife. And so I actually don't have a lot of long lasting friendships or friendships that I really am able to keep up with. I don't have time. I've actually prioritized other things. And so the question for you is, what are you willing to give up and still be happy as you pursue happiness? And of course, down here it asks, have you thoughtfully planned your future? Yes, you might be a high powered corporate lawyer and wealth and fame and fortune. Are you willing to work 60 to 80 hours a week doing all those things, which might not give you enough time to do some of the things that you want to do on your own? That is a real question that we should be having, conversation we should be having about what is the meaning of life. Supposedly there are 12 steps to happiness, and this is coming out of both Buddhist and science. Be thankful, give to others, help others, eat well, exercise, get enough rest, ironically, experience the world and really take it in, hike, go outdoors in particular, meditate, socialize, take aim for teleological targets, and smile. And one way we do it is that we can control the emotions. You can manage your brain chemicals by doing some of these. Schizophrenia, anxiety, happiness. No, do different chemicals control emotions and healthy and mental health? They certainly do. Look what we're looking at when we see a balance of these individuals coming together. Now, as we think about success and future in life, we've got to talk about our own experiences and how that plays in as well. Because we can't just say, oh, there's no background baggage, no nothing. But we do have experiences that can allow us this. So for success and for failure and what we're willing to do. I absolutely believe that everyone can be successful. And part of that is from my own background in resilience that shows up. If you look at beneath me right now where we are for the factors for failure in life, I have a number of factors where it would have been very easy for me to fail at multiple different times in my life. And there have been times in my life where I was very close, willing to give up. And luckily, I have an incredible work ethic. And that work ethic on some level is what saved me. So if you look at my background, I have come from terrible genetics. I have a number of drug addicts, alcoholics, mental health disorders that comes up in my background. I was a colicky baby. I was extremely overweight even at 6 months old. I had a learning disability until I was in the 8th grade, and I figured out my eyes, and that helped within the process. I have a lifelong eye issue that sometimes you'll see. I actually have a lazy eye. So I have one eye that sees the world and the other eye that doesn't. If I close the eye, I can still see, so it's not functional. They just don't ever work together. So my doctors told me it's a miracle, like I was ever able to catch a three-dimensional ball. I had sexual abuse that took place by a babysitter when I was young. I have a family history of sex abuse. I'm the first generation college, and I developed huge college loan debt. No one told me there was another way. I suffer from depression and anxiety, mostly depression. I had PTSD from my work overseas. Very many years, I had suicidal ideations, particularly throughout my teen years with the depression, alcoholism, drug abuse throughout the entire family. I went to a terrible public school system, less than 8% of people going to college. I have racism throughout my extended family, including members of the KKK. I study African people. That's a real red flag. And I was literally living on the child poverty line, including food stamps that were available to my family and the free lunch program like many of you. Now, I was able to overall come all those. A lot of that has to do, I had a great supportive family, so let's start off there. I also have some huge advantages. I'm a white male, heterosexual, Christian raised, born in the US, which allows us to overcome a lot. I had a very academically supportive family. I got to travel around the United States as a child. I never went hungry or homeless. That was not an issue that showed up. I was in a stable family without divorce. I have a very involved father, especially for sports. He was my coach in many capacities. I have a supportive, very academically inclined wife and loving sisters and brother, even to this day. So I had a lot of things that showed up. Now, with that success and that failure, no, I also have to bring something to the table. What I bring to the table is an incredible work ethic. And that's why I say if you're willing to work harder than other people, you can achieve anything. I'm also willing to take risks on myself. I believe in myself, particularly now that I think I can do something. I'm going to go out and I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to will it into existence because of my hard work. I'm constantly striving for improvement. And I believe in absolute kindness, the random acts of kindness, such I perform all the time to try to help other individuals. I am a time management superstar. I can manage my time like nobody's business, down to 5 to 6 minutes. And I love to travel, and I've been to more than 100 countries now, which makes me interesting when I travel. So if you think about all the potential aspects for failure, all the positives for success that come from that are not in my control, family, non-divorced, and then my own superpowers, look what I've been able to achieve with that work ethic and with the things. I have actually been able to work and help get 5 million children educated on different programs around the world. I'm a United Nations finalist humanitarian teacher of the year. And I'm very, very grateful that the person that I lost to is one of my heroes. I lost to Malala, who actually now won the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm a Hollywood cultural consultant. I get to work on Moana, Black Panther. I regularly consult with Disney and Marvel Studios. I've won the President's National Service Award for Helping Humanity, a Lifetime Achievement Award twice, both from President Obama. I've been nominated 3 times for the National Professor of the Year. I've raised more than $1 million for charity, largely through the work with our students. I've helped work with 15,000 refugees that were forced out of their communities, mostly in Africa. I've won an endowed teaching chair. There's only 5,000 people now, or 5,002 people, who have won Disney's Kings to the Kingdom about impacting Disney World. I am one of those. I'm number 4,999. And I've been a devoted father, husband, son. I absolutely believe that with hard work, time management, take your superpower skills, you are able to overcome almost everything. But it does mean you have to reach out and get help, particularly if you need help like I did when I was going through depressive or suicidal ideations. Outside of and here's what I wanted you to know in terms of the accomplishment of what I'm able to do. What I'm able to do, very proud of. But no, outside of my family and a future Google search, no one will know my name in 50 years. They don't. I'm not after fame. I'm not after fortune. I'm not after any of that. 50 years, if you Google search me, you'll say, oh yeah, there's Fraser's name. I have no idea what he did. He's one of the other 600 names on Black Panther, one of the other 500 names on Moana. But I have led a meaningful life, and the world is slightly better, and people in the world are better due to my life. So the question here becomes, you must find your own meaning of life. Path knowing your background, limitations, and your individual superpowers. You put them all together, along with my wife and my favorite colors up here, orange and purple together, you can achieve great things. So for my background, as we're looking at this class, I am what's called an axiological atheist. I have a strong disbelief in the divine, as well as a strong spiritual connection to my fellow humanity. I feel a spiritualness towards humanity. Life, I believe, is the search for what is morally right, true, and beneficial to humanity and Earth's flourishing. Hope, kindness, freedom from, and goodness. Basically, the idea of what we call moral atheism. And as such, I've had some real challenges in my life. Here are some mass graves that I documented when I was in Rwanda in 1994, doing African genocide research for the United Nations. I got to work, this is Angelina Jolie, with the refugee in the Congo in 2017. This is Ben Affleck, and also Congo project that what happened the year before in Kabati, Congo, where I was in Congo with Ben Affleck. Got to play basketball with, of course, President Obama at the White House and other times in Chicago. I get to help design Wakanda as the future's African aesthetic. I got to work on a lovely film about chess called The Queen of Katwe. And here is the director, Mira Nair, along with Lupita Nyong'o, who you probably all know today now from various movies like Us. Here's us on the trip actually with Ben Affleck with the kids in the Congo. Here's Lupita actually at the market along with me, and I got to meet her mom. What a lovely family. And with the CGUI here at Miami-Dade College, we've got to actually meet Clinton, President Clinton, and his wife and his children actually a number of different times. Actually, it's a child, Chelsea. Now, all of that comes down to where are we going with Buddhism and the meaningful life? And here's how it ties in. Buddhism is based upon the 4 noble truths. There is the truth that's suffering. On some level, Buddhism starts off with a very a very negative aspect. And that is that all life is suffering, that life involves suffering. Think about all those awful things that I had to go through as a child, the suicidal ideations, the idea of depression, the alcoholism in the family, the drug abuse. Life is suffering. There is a cause of suffering, and that is because we're too attached to other things, particularly our material desires. We need to get past those material desires. I was depressed because I wanted other things. I wanted my life to be better. I wanted what other people have. Unfortunately, in our social media world, we have more depressed people. Why? Because you see the best part of people's lives. Very few people put out the most negative parts of their lives on social media, right? It's all about the best. And so you're like, wow, I am not normal. There is an end to suffering. And that end to suffering, that path to the cessation of suffering, is you can go through the Four Noble Truths. So there is a way out of it, but we've got to be willing to take the risk in Buddhism. So if we look at this another way, if we look at this another way, the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering. Suffering has an origin, generally tied to our attachment to desires. Suffering can cease, we can work on it, and there's a path out of the suffering. And that path is actually called the Noble Eightfold Path. And it basically is based upon right everything. Right view. I want to know the truth. Right intention. I want to free my mind from evil. I don't want jealousy, right? I don't feel guilty or badly when someone else gets something that I do not get, but I have a pretty good life at this point. Right speech. I try to say nothing that hurts one another. Now, sometimes you have to tell the truth as well, and so right view and right speech sometimes conflict, but you try to be nice about it. Someone says, do I have the skills to be a professional artist? Like, great, I'm an art professor, and I know they probably don't. Not that they can't develop those skills, which I can tell them, but they might not have the work ethic to develop those skills. And that's something they've got to consider. Right action. I try to take actions that are specifically good for others. I want everyone to succeed within my classes and in my life. Right livelihood. I do respect life. Right? I want people to live and live to the happiest, fullest of their potential. The American dream of the pursuit of happiness. Right effort. Resist evil. I am willing to put up, and actually, I have actually put my life on the line to save others in the face of evil. We could talk about that when we talk about genocide in Africa later on. Right concentration, practice meditation. This is one thing I do not do, actually. I do think about my life, and I'm very self-reflective, and that goes up to the next level, right mindfulness of controlling my thoughts. I'm very able to have kind thoughts, even when people are mean to me. So I can say, wonder if they had a bad day. I wonder if this, because you never know what happened to that person an hour or 5 minutes before you just met them. You never know what's going to set them off. And so the 5 precepts of the Buddha come out of all of this. Do not harm any life being. Most Buddhists will ultimately end up and become vegetarians. Do not steal, only take what's freely given to you. Respect each other, really provide people respect. If you see someone even of a lower status than you supposedly, you should show that person respect. They are human, they are another sentient being, right? That's what we need to do. Speak kindly to others as often as you can, and avoid actions that are harmful to your body and mind. Do everything in moderation. And if you do that, you are living a Buddhist lifestyle, a Buddhist aspect. And so one of the problems we have, it's sometimes hard to do this with capitalism. Because if you think about what are the implications of Buddhism for a capitalist society, well, capitalism is all about the raising of capital, the raising of cash. And sometimes that raising of cash can harm individuals that are farther down on the capitalist food chain. And so capitalism itself might have some inherent problems within Buddhism. Now, not all of these individuals, like the cashier is just doing their job, who either can afford the item or not. It's not the cashier's job to mark out and say, oh, well, I can give you 25% off. Oh, I can give you 40% off. That would be the next level up that determines the pricing. Is the price structure fair within the process? Buddhism allows for a profit. It allows you to attain wealth, provided, like Hinduism, you're using your wealth for the betterment of yourself, your family, and your humanity in general. And so Buddhism asks very deep questions. For example, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear the sound, does it still make a noise? Now, this sounds ridiculous, and you're like, clearly it's not. This is a Buddhist koan. This is one of those Buddhist koans, or koan. Now, what this means is it makes you reflect about all of your knowledge and integrate it in a new way. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear the sound, does it still make a noise? Well, it makes a sound wave. And is a noise a sound wave that must be heard or experienced? Can only people, when we talk about no one, hear it? What happens if a bird experiences the brush of air and interprets that as sound? How do we know there's a sound? Because just because everything else has fallen before and created a sound wave, does that mean this tree produces a sound wave? Not everything that happens always produces the same result. Why did the tree fall if there was no one there? Right? If no one is defined as any sentient being, it had to fall for a reason. Is there any place where there is no sentient being to understand? No ants, no animals at all? So it basically asks us to ask about everything in nature. What's there? When is there? What are even the definitions of noise, sound, sound wave? How do we interpret it? Because think about this. If a tree falls in a forest and only deaf people are there to hear it, does it still make a sound? Well, that gets the idea of what sound wave is and what they see versus hearing within the process. And so it gets to very complicated aspects. And that's where we get into the idea of studying the Buddhist koans. And that's what we're looking at here today.
How do we explain the unexplainable? This question has inspired numerous myths, religious practices, and scientific inquiries. But Zen Buddhists practicing throughout China from the 9th to 13th century asked a different question. Why do we need an explanation? For these monks, blindly seeking answers was a vice to overcome, and learning to accept the mysteries of existence was the true path to enlightenment. But fighting the urge to explain the unexplainable can be difficult. So, to help practice living with these mysteries, the meditating monks used a collection of roughly 1,700 bewildering and ambiguous philosophical thought experiments called koans. The name, originally Kung An in Chinese, translates to public record or case. But unlike real-world court cases, koans were intentionally incomprehensible. They were surprising, surreal, and frequently contradicted themselves. On the surface, they contained a proverb about the Zen Buddhist monastic code, such as living without physical or mental attachments, avoiding binary thinking, and realizing one's true Buddha nature. But by framing those lessons as illogical anecdotes, they became tests to help practicing monks learn to live with ambiguity and paradox. By puzzling through these confusing cases, meditating monks could both internalize and practice Buddhist teachings. Hopefully, they would let go of the search for one true answer and trigger a spiritual breakthrough. Since these are intentionally unexplainable, it would be misguided to try and decipher these stories ourselves. But like the monks before us, we can puzzle over them together and investigate just how resistant they are to simple explanations. Consider this koan illustrating the practice of no attachment. Two monks, Tanzen and Aikido, are traveling together down a muddy road. Ahead, they see an attractive traveler, unable to cross the muddy path. Tanzen politely offers his help, carrying the traveler on his back across the street and placing her down without a word. Aikido was shocked. According to monastic law, monks were not supposed to go near women, let alone touch a beautiful stranger. After miles of walking, Aikido could no longer restrain himself. "How could you carry that woman?" Tanzen smiled. "I left the traveler there. Are you still carrying her?" Like all koans, this story has numerous interpretations. But one popular reading suggests that despite never having physically carried the traveler, Aikido broke monastic law by mentally clinging to the woman. This type of conflict Examining the grey area between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law was common in koans. In addition to exploring ambiguity, koans often ridiculed characters, claiming total understanding of the world around them. One such example finds three monks debating a temple flag rippling in the wind. The first monk refers to the flag as a moving banner, while the second monk insists that they are not seeing the flag move, but rather the wind blowing. They argue back and forth until finally a third monk intervenes. It is not the flag moving, nor the wind blowing, but rather the movement of your minds. One interpretation of this koan plays on the supposed wisdom of the arguing monks. The first asserting the importance of the observable world, the second favoring deeper knowledge we can infer from that world. But each monk's commitment to his own answer blinds him to the other's insight, and in doing so, defies an essential Buddhist ideal, abolishing binary thinking. The third monk identifies their conflict as a perceptual one. Both arguing monks fail to see the larger picture. Of course, all these interpretations only hint at how to wrestle with these koans. Neither the wisdom from practicing monks before us, nor the supposedly wise characters in these stories can resolve them for you. That's because the purpose of these koans isn't reaching a simple solution. It's the very act of struggling with these paradoxical puzzles which challenge our desire for resolution and our understanding of understanding itself. Want to try your hand at some puzzles that do have resolutions? Check out our riddles playlist and get solving.
And so that is actually what a koan is. It actually tries to get you to a deeper understanding of the human experience and of the worldly existential experience that is beyond us. And so it's a very challenging notion. Now, Buddhism really does begin with this individual here. This is a Hindu prince named Siddhartha Gautama, and his father built him a pleasure palace because he realized and was told the prophecy that his son would either be a world-conquering hero or a great religious man. As a Hindu king, he wanted to have a world-conquering hero son. And so during an unannounced outing, Siddhartha encountered basically four major problems within humanity: illness, poverty, old age, and death. And he was, as a secluded individual, he was never faced with these four troubles. Deeply shaken, he couldn't respond to the perfumed women who greet him on his return in his pleasure palace up here. And here's what he says: "For what rational being would stand or sit or lie at ease, still less laugh when he knows of suffering?" So these are the four human sufferings he experienced. And so he decides at that point that he's no longer going to be the world-conquering hero of his father. He's going to leave and try to be a religious monk man and try to figure out, why do people suffer and how do we get people past suffering? So note here, as a young man, imagine 16, 17-year-old, you have these beautiful, most beautiful women in the planet, breasts showing, half naked, one wading in the water, basically calling and pulling on your leg to let you in. You basically have a free sex pass that shows up of this pleasure garden of wealth. And at 17 years old or 16 years old, you decide to leave because you realize there's something greater out there for you. That is the tale of Siddhartha Gautama. And so, look, the nude woman tries to lure him in when he's just a teenager. We have decorative lions that are framing here, and that is because the name for lion is Shakya. And so Siddhartha is a member of the Shakya clan, of the Shakya family. And to show what he could have, we have this beautiful Mithuna couple, basically a couple over here, that are starting to touch one another and get aroused, starting to fondle one another. That's the pleasure that he can have. But he's willing to give that all up to try to understand suffering. Now, as we look at this, both Hinduism and Buddhism, with all of their different features, they're going to develop at the exact same time period in the exact same area in India. They're going to share a lot of concepts. And so as we look at, here's a list for Hinduism. I won't go all through this. And here's a list all for Buddhism, and we won't go through all this as well, though in class we have gone through it before. They're both in India. They both believe that suffering in life is caused by an attachment to desires. Buddhism believes they're material desires, and so that's what we're going to focus on here. They both believe in the process of reincarnation, and one place in Buddhism is actually nirvana, this place of enlightenment. And in Hinduism, it's the end of the cycle of rebirth, and you become one with the spirit energy that happens to be samsara. So they're very similar in what they're trying to do. Now, as Buddhism spreads, we're going to start getting images of the Buddha that look more like this. Note, this is not the way the Buddha would have originally looked. The Buddha is a young man who actually travels around and lives off the offerings of other underneath a tree. And so he's going to be very, very slender. But slender didn't sell in China, and it wasn't marketable in Japan. And that is because in China and Japan, and particularly in China, as Buddha comes across on the Silk Road, and the stories of Buddha comes across on the Silk Road, it was about wealth and power, and that was shown by a more corpulent, a larger body. So we change even the bodies over. Now think, we do about this all the time in the Western world as well. Do we really want to make the claim that Jesus is a white guy living in the Middle East? That's going to be the most notable white guy. Judas is not going to have to kiss him on the lip or on the cheek to point him out, for the Romans to find him before the crucifixion. They're basically just going to be able to point and say, oh, Jesus is the white guy. He's living among Middle Easterns, right? It's the way we present it to make it more palatable to a cultural tradition. So the stories that come down and the ideas that come down are really shown here. So this is the colossal Buddha from Japan, and it's got various Buddhist symbols that are shown. These symbols are called Lakshana, L-A-K-S-H-A-N, Buddhist Lakshana symbols, symbols of the Buddha. So let's start at the top of the head. At the very top, he's going to have up here what's called a Ushnisha, right there, an Ushnisha, which is a top knot or a cranial bump on the head. It's supposed to be a tuft of hair, but it's also going to be read as a cranial bump on his head. So a little tuft of hair right in the front. Going down, you'll note the next level down, right in the middle of his forehead, he's going to have an urna. And that urna is a white, supposedly soft wisp of hair. It's supposed to show his wisdom. Now remember, this is a tradition that develops in India, and Indian women particularly wear the bindi here, which is the idea of that third eye, the idea of seeing into the other world. The Buddhas particularly would be able to do this as well. He's going to have nearly closed eyes. See how close to being closed they are? And that's like a cow. Large eyes. Remember, cows are sacred animals in India. When his eyes are open, he's going to have the bluest of eyes, which is rare and associates him with the skies and with the waters. Remember, Vishnu practitioners believe that the ninth avatar of Buddha is actually, or the ninth avatar of Vishnu is actually Buddha here on earth. And that is a blue-skinned individual. He's going to have, note the squarish jawline here, rather than a squarish jawline here, particularly right here. That's considered to have a lion jaw, just like the Shakya clan, and it's a symbol of power. He's from the Shakya clan. He's got elongated ears from heavy earrings. Why? He was a prince. He was a Hindu prince for princely wealth. He has 40 evenly spaced teeth. The average humans have 32, not evenly spaced. He has no hollow between his shoulders, so it goes straight across. His skin is so fine, supposedly, that no dust attaches to it. He has perfection, as his arm equals his leg length, which basically means when he does a circle and a square, it's perfect. This is Da Vinci's model of the Vitruvian man, writ large. It doesn't really exist in nature. He also has long fingers and long toes, which makes it particularly easy for him to do the various teaching gestures that we have from Buddhism, called mudras, M-U-D-R-A-S over here. And finally, the Dharma, the circular wheel that we see, very similar to the wheel for the spinning wheel that we see on the Indian flag, marks the soles of his feet. Now, there are 40 of these overall, so I won't go through all of them, but that's what we're looking at. Now, if you're Hindu, how do you tell the difference between Buddha, as Buddha for Buddhists, and Buddha as the ninth avatar of Vishnu? And the whole notion for Hinduism, they don't care. To them, it's the same. That's what they're looking at. The major images of the Buddha are these images that we're going to show you here. The birth of the Buddha, basically coming out right out of Queen Maya's side. So generally, we don't see this very often, but if you have a birth of the Buddha coming right out of the Maya side, that's what we're looking at. We have the enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, generally with a reflective hand gesture that kind of looks like this. We're going to have the first teaching of the wheel of Dharma, the hand gesture that looks like this, with the wheel in the middle. And finally, a peaceful death, as if the Buddha is just taking a nap and his life ends. Those are the four dominant images of Buddha we have. We have birth, the idea of the meditation under the Bodhi tree of enlightenment, the first teaching wheel of Dharma, and finally the peaceful death. And the changes then change fairly dramatically from one end across the other. So in India, because of the Silk Road and their close proximity to Rome, we're going to see more Western Roman influence, including some more realistic drapery that shows up, some Western details, almost looks like a combination of a Western individual. The Indian style is much more curvilinear. That's the Gandhara, or I'm sorry, that's the Gupta style from the kind of Gupta period from the 5th century. In China, no, we're going to get larger. And later on, after China, Buddhism is going to travel to Thailand, and so we're going to get a much more curvilinear that comes much more similar to the Indian style. The symbols all remain the same. And so that symbolism, the Lakshana, are all the same in all these different images. They're all different manifestations of the Buddha. If you compare and contrast, you'll note Buddhist thought and the Greco-Roman. So they've got oval faces, long noses, high arched eyebrows, and hard drapery. But note, it has no impact on the Lakshana. In the India Gupta style, highly expressive, curvilinear drapery style, geometrically, almost like strings on the body. Over here, we get a little bit of a fatter Buddha, as we talked about, more full figure for posterity, which we've talked about in China and later on in Japan. And in Thailand, we're getting the slender feminine hips with pagoda crown. At pagoda, we're going to see a lot, but note, very similar to the Indian style that shows up. Now, we can draw a lot of parallel doctrines between people in history. And one of the ones that we often draw doctrines from are the idea of the Buddha and Jesus, who were living across the Silk Road. So we've already established the Silk Road. So there are ideas going back and forth between India, Rome, and the Middle East. And the ideas that show up in almost every religion are treat others as you would yourself. That is a foundational principle in every religion in the world, except for Satanism, if we want to consider that a religion. That you really should have this pro-life movement for individuals, that you want them to treat you in the same respect and dignity that you could trade with. The idea of not avenging yourself. If someone does you harm, turn the other cheek. The idea of helping the needy. Again, a great doctrine, not for Jesus and Buddha, but almost every religious tradition. The idea of avoiding violence, that violence really should not be used for almost any cause unless it's a very just cause. And even in Buddhism, they don't really have many just causes. And then judge yourself, not others. It's okay to evaluate yourself. Don't evaluate others because you have no idea how they got in those conditions, and your job is to help them out of those conditions. So the parallels are pretty striking. In Buddhism, we are going to see this lovely, gorgeous architecture that develops. And so we are going to look at four major styles of Buddhist architecture that show up here that show you the difference. The first one you can see I am actually right next to is going to be the first ones that show up, and that's the Great Stupa, and it's from a town called Sanchi in India, 300 BCE. We're going to move there, and we're going to look at some from China, and so another one in India. We're going to see the Mahabodhi temple and Bodh Gaya. Note that is the tree under which the Buddha sat to gain enlightenment, also in India. And look how close, and I'll show you a comparison in a moment, it is to actually the Hindu temple with a particular style. Note it's square, so it's a little bit more in southern India. Note we are going to have things that show up like Horyuji Temple of flourishing law when we finally make it to Japan. and the 6 banyan tree pagoda in China. So we need to look at how these play out. Now, when we look at the great stupa behind me, it's kind of awesome. So here's the story about it. The mound here is called the egg. Note how it's egg-shaped and not just perfectly round. And it refers to the story of creation when a golden egg fell through the void and finally separated. Note you only have half of the egg here. The upper half became the sky, the lower half the support of the oceans, and land formed from the yolk. So that's the color of the land that we're looking at. The land was in the form of the great mountain, Mount Meru. Remember, that's significant to both Buddhists and Hindus from the Himalaya mountains. And such, the stupa is a miniature replica of the universe. Right? We've got the egg that shows up here. We've got the half above that sticks up in the sky, and a small little crenellation on the top. So it was originally built for the Emperor Ashoka from the Maurya dynasty. We'll be talking about him in a moment as well. When we look at this, the Great Stupa, you'll know, whenever we see squares, they recognize the attachment to the material desires. Why? Because men, women, humans make the perfect shape of a square. That is our cause for perfection. That's our material design. When we look at the circular or the slightly oblong spherical, that is much more about enlightenment. So the earthen mound here that's built up, which is imperfect, so this giant mass, that really is those individuals that are enlightened. No, it is the vast majority of humanity. The next up, that square where we make the marking here, that's our recognizing that we have an attachment to material desire. So the 3 discs all the way at the top, those are those individuals that are Buddhists that are on their way to enlightenment. So note here, a fraction of the vast majority of the world's population, only a fraction of them are even thinking about material desire or their attachment, and that's what's causing them problem. And even fewer still are attaining Buddhahood. The entire goal of Buddhism is that everyone attain Buddhahood, and they believe that everyone can be a Buddha. There's not just one Buddha, there's thousands of Buddhas. Hopefully in the future there'll be millions and billions of Buddhas, because that's when we all attain nirvana, right? We all become one, and we release all of our attachments, and we become one with nirvana. So the stupas here, there were originally 8 of them. They originally contained the body remnants of the first Buddha, the historical Buddha, the Siddhartha Gautama. You worship them by clockwise circumambulation, which basically means by walking around them. Now you can walk around in any combination that you want, but the most common numbers for Buddhism are 3, 4, 8, 12, or 15. 3, right? There's 3 different areas. We've got the unenlightened, that I know I need to get enlightened and I'm attached by my material desires, and the 3 discs at the top attaining enlightenment. That gives us 3. 4, the 4 noble truths. All life is suffering. There's a cause for suffering. There's a way out of suffering, and that way out of suffering is the noble fourfold or eightfold path. The 8, the eightfold path. There's right mindfulness. There's right action. There's right thought. So we're looking at all those things. 12, combination of 4 and 8. So the 4 noble truths and the eightfold path. And 15 is a combination of all those, the first 3 numbers. So that's what we're looking at. The dome then echoes the sky arch, and it generally is raised up and sits off the earth on a raised platform, similar to a Hindu temple. Should not surprise us, right? The sacred and the profane are separated in a lot of architecture. And the stupa itself, with its layout on the outside, just like the southern style Hindu temples, recalls an Aryan village plan with 4 gateways and a double pathway like Indian South temples. So if you look at, here's the Great Stupa versus an Indian South temple. Note how rectilinear this is. And the Aryan village, then you can see the double walls that show up in terms of having individuals come in. Same way, there's a double wall. You walk in, and you have to make 2 different walk-ins to get to the inside to circumambulate. So there are 4 gateways in all 4 directions. There's a double pathway, and the tree of knowledge is in the center. In this case, is actually a solid mound with an axis mundi, just like we saw here, a pole that runs all the way from the earth up through the mound, and that's where the Buddhist relics are. So the stupa evolved like this to where we are today. It started off in the Mauryan, so all the way 4th century BCE. I don't need you to know all the different. Then they added the 3 levels. So it was just a mound, a burial mound with the Buddhist here. Then they're going to add a little bit of the 3 features here. That idea that, earthen mound of those are unenlightened, the people who know they need to attain enlightenment and know material desires their structure, and those people that are actually striving for it. Later on, then, we're going to add, during the Kushan dynasty, those extra lines to line it and make it look much more like an Aryan village. And so in some capacity, going to visit an image like this is very similar to going to visit an image like this. Note the Ushnisha. Note the material desires, the brain and the head up here, the squarish. Then you have the body mass coming down here. That's the body mass that comes down here. At the Great Stupa at Sanchi, on the gates, and the gates are called Torana, Torana, there are different depictions about the Buddha's life. Early on, the Buddha was not meant to be represented. The Buddha actually gets represented later on. It was considered profane. They were worried about people worshiping the Buddha when he's a historical figure, not a god, but a historical figure that is there to offer enlightenment. And so here we see the wheel of Dharma, right there, the law kind of that shows up. Here we have the stupa itself. So a lot of these symbols relate to the life of the Buddha or the life of what was going on in India at the same time. On the very corners are these highly sexualized images like we saw in Hindu temples. And so one interpretation of these, and it's just one, is that Buddha's mom Maya here reached up here and touched a tree, and the Buddha was born out of her side, right out of her side here. And so there is the sense that shows up. But no, she's fully naked. You see the vagina, you see the breasts that show up. This was not considered profane in any way in India. It was just a part of life. Once you get in, note the double wall. So here's the outside. There's the Tirana gate we just walked through. And now we get to circumambulate 3, 4, 8, 12, or 15 times before we climb up to the next level. That's completely up to us. So here's the double wall. Compare and contrast religious experience of these Buddha sites. Note this is what I mentioned before. Up here is the Ushnisha, the idea of enlightened wisdom. We've got the dome kind of for the head and the square torso of the earth beneath. And so here we have the progression from a square base, symbolic of the earth, and the circular element, symbolic of enlightenment, became a universal sign of enlightenment. So we're going to see the stupa image a lot. And all Buddhist architecture contains a center axis, whether it's that body axis here, whether it's the axis mundi right here, a compass points orientation. They generally have a north, south, east, and west orientation, and the pure geometry that generally combines the square and the earth of the heavens with the circle. So one of the events that actually has changed the world is this battle right here. So this is the Kalinga War. The Kalinga War of the Maurya Hindu Emperor Ashoka for control over the spice trade. So here's the story on the right, and the implications are enormous for Buddhism and also for Hinduism. The ruler Ashoka was stunned by grief and remorse as he looked across the battlefield. He had gone to war, expanding his empire, and now in 261 BCE, he was unexpectedly shocked by the horror. He looked out and he saw 100,000 deaths and suffering that he was responsible for going to war. Only one figure moved on all the battlefield out of the 100,000 dead, a monk who walked across the carnage. Decrying violence and warfare for what he had just done, he converted to Buddhism and pacifism on the battlefield right there. From that moment on, he set a noble example by living his belief in nonviolence and kindness to all beings and never going to war again. And so he is going to start the idea, and is probably the individual outside of Siddhartha himself, the founder of the religion, that is most responsible for the idea of Buddhism making an international claim. He's going to rule by kindness, truthfulness, and purity. He's the first leader in world history for kindness, purity, and truthfulness that's going to ban slavery in his kingdom. He's going to promote vegetarianism. Every prisoner, even those ones that have done terrible, would get 1 day off per year to go and bond with their family. He's going to make free universities, free irrigation systems so people don't starve, equal rights for all people, including the poor. He's going to renovate the roads and develop animal hospitals. This is a superior ruler, and this is an individual that lived before Jesus. Brilliant man, Ashoka, all found on the principle of Buddhism. So he creates these large-scale pillars to promote Buddhism. Note, the pillars here form axis mundi. They actually go all the way from here, and there used to be a giant circle, like here, the Dharma wheel on the lion's back, and went all the way down. They were large-scale, 40 to 60 feet tall. The lion, of course, as I mentioned already, in the square jaw of the lion resembles the lion jaw here, showing that he's from the Shakya clan. He's got the Dharma wheel they've set in motion here, and a lotus blossom, which is a symbol of purity in all of Buddhist thought and Asian thought. That's what Ashoka starts to promote. And they are going to start making these beautiful temples. And of Buddhist temples, the first ones are actually carved into caves. Caves were seen as mystical places in India, and the carving of the rock was the absolute hard work that you would have to do in order to attain enlightenment as a Buddhist. So this is the Chatya Hall of Karla, which is a Buddhist rock-cut temple. And look at the gorgeous nature. This is the inside of a rock mountain face that they carve all the columns, all the stories of the Buddha, all the ideas of the life and how to live a good life, and ended it with a stupa 50 feet back into this kind of stupa right here, that cylindrical top. Then they had apartments that were carved out for Buddhist monks who wanted to live here in isolation to try to bring about everyone to be Buddhist. The other early version of architecture is here. And note, this is very similar to the southern style of Hindu architecture. This is the Mahabodhi temple, where the Bodhi tree, where the Buddha attained enlightenment from India. It was done during the Kushan Empire, don't worry about that, or dynasty. It was rebuilt by the Gupta, but note, in the same style as the Kushan. And this is the actual Bodhi tree. So what you're looking at is an ancestral tree. That is the Bodhi tree ancestor. That's the 5th generation of the original enlightenment tree that supposedly the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, sat underneath where he attained enlightenment. And you can still go visit that exact spot. For a Buddhist, this is about as sacred as it gets. This would be the equivalent to go visiting where Jesus was born in Nazareth, or the Via della Rosa, the crucifixion of Jesus. The Mahabodhi temple, these are the tower sculptures that show up. And you'll note there's multiple different images of the Buddha showing the different stages in life and also enlightenment. You can see how closely resembled, because the time period and the ideas are so close, that the Shiva Mahadeva Southern style temple is almost the exact same thing here, right? You have the very tall Sakkara tower topped by the Amalaka that shows up, the 3 elements coming off the top, the smaller little ones off to the side rather than in front, showing the mountains or the waves here. Here it's just about the style that shows up, very dark on the inside, nothing holding them down, no glue, no nails, no screws, no rocks. It really is the pressure and the perfect locking of the pieces together that hold together. So very similar in style. And of course, the standing Buddha coming across the Silk Road. You can see starting in India, travels all over India, Afghanistan, Tibet, China, Korea, Japan, to the major areas that are Buddhist today, and eventually to the United States. Now, when you experience a Buddhist temple, and so we're going to do the one in Japan, one of the first things that you will see is that you will go through an area in a Buddhist temple that generally is a gateway. It is like walking from outside in the profane, the world that we live in, into a sacred spot. We do this in many religions. The first thing you do when you walk into a Christian church in Europe, most of the Christian Gothic cathedrals, you wash your hands and you purify yourself. Because out there is hell in the profane world and where sin is. And in here is the idea of being clean. And that's one of the first things. There's generally a water source. So here's me and my little guys cleaning our bodies because we know that we are dirty as we're going to go to pray, coming out of a dragon spout right here. So my son and my daughter, they were tiny. Little guy was 4. My daughter was 6 at the time. The next thing you do is you actually wash yourself with incense. So we double wash. Note, if you've ever been to a Roman Catholic church, they walk around with an incense burner right after you have washed to make the place smell beautiful, but also to purify it. That's what these Torana gates show. Note, Torana, or Torii gate here, when we call it in Japan, it's the same concept. It's the idea of a purification entranceway that separates you from the religious space, the sacred space, versus the non-religious space. Then when you get on site, there will be different activities and things for you to do. Now, Buddhism, like most other religions, is generally an individual worship, kind of like Hinduism was. It's generally not about congregational worship. It's about you developing a relationship with yourself, with your God, with your Buddha, with your inner enlightenment. And we'll often have 2 or 3 different buildings that are there. One of the buildings they generally have is a pagoda. And the pagoda is a different variation then of the Buddha's body. So this on some level is, consider this like the temple at Sanchi behind me of the Great Stupa, where you have the axis mundi going up through the world and then coming all the way down. They generally believe many of the pagodas that are built have a tiny fragment of a Buddha's bone or of a Buddha's bone. Remember, it doesn't always have to be the historical Buddha. And they're generally very tall structures. They will often have an uneven number. In this case, it has 5, which really doesn't have a Buddhist referent that shows up from earlier. But that's what they're looking at. This is Horyuji, also known as the Temple of the Flourishing Law. And so it's dedicated to the healing Buddha. And this is a nada in Japan. Nara, that R sound, they don't really have in most Japanese literature. So it's like an RD combined with nada in Japan. So this is the Kondo Golden Hall, where I just showed you, we purified ourselves and walked through the Torii gates before we got here. Inside then are the images that we are going to look at and potentially worship. And so we won't worship the images as if Buddha is there. Remember, Buddha can be anywhere, and also you have the ability to be a Buddha. So it's a very different worshiping process. So here, the Shaka Triad by Toribushi. So you'll see and read about this. Shaka Triad by Toribushi. It's based upon the Sakya Muni, or the Shakya clan in Japanese. And note, they sit on a lotus throne. So this is basically the historical Buddha, the Shakya clan, sitting out on a lotus throne of purity that shows up. On his left-hand side, he's got the Buddha of medicine with him. And on the right-hand side, he's got Amida, the Western Paradise Buddha of light and love. This particular image here, and the idea that there's a focus on the Western Paradise, this is the most common form of Buddhism that you've probably never heard of, and is the most common form of Buddhism still practiced today in Japan. Zen is more famous, but Western Paradise or Amida Buddhism is much more powerful. And the advantage of the Amida, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is the Amida Buddhism is actually very easy comparatively. Zen is a very hard practice of enlightenment and self-reflection. Amida actually got to the point where at certain points, to try to get people to practice, they would say, and they would sing little ditties like, all hail to the Amida Buddha, all hail to the Amida Buddha, all hail to the Amida Buddha. And literally the idea of you saying it over and over as you're walking, just doing your daily chores, if you meant it, might bring you closer to the pure land at the very end. So on the back of this lovely lotus flame here, it says, it ensures that the crown prince Shotoku would be reborn in the Buddhist paradise. So this was a dedication for actually the prince Shotoku. The gilded statues then radiate the light of Buddha's wisdom. See how they stick out and they're a little bit reflective when the sun hits them? So it radiates the light of Buddha's wisdom and mercy, and as it's facing us, it reflects it back all to us. So we get to be involved with the artistic practice. So there's a wall behind these lovelies, and that's the screen you're looking at. And this is the Western Paradise wall facing west, where the Western Paradise of Amida Buddhism is, behind the Shaka Triad in the condo, in this other flat building. Note, this is also another one from Nara, Japan, the Daibutsun. This is the Hall of the Great Buddha, one of the largest Buddhas in all of Japan, also in a very famous place in Nara. Nara used to be an ancient capital, so that's why we have so many wonderful Buddhist sites. And it's about an hour outside of a later capital, the most famous later capital for history in Japanese history, Kyoto. And so on either side of the Daibutsun, they had the largest wooden structures on earth at the time. And there were 2 tower pagodas that were 300 feet tall. And at that point, they were the second tallest buildings on earth, only behind the Great Pyramids at Giza. So the Daibutsun is the Hall of the Great Buddha. It's also called Todaiji. So don't worry about all the different names right now. This is from 8th century Nara, Japan, because I'm more worried about the contextual framework. In 728, Emperor Shomu had Prince Modu, his first son with his Fujiwara clan consort, Komayoshi. Prince Motoi died a year after his birth, and this temple then was an offering to make sure that the son went off into the Western Paradise. So we see a fair number of these individuals that die young that actually have these various Buddhist temples that you would go and worship, and people would go to worship to get people into the Western Paradise. So this is 26,000 builders, and the building today is about 30% smaller because these 2 towers, they've actually both, or actually this one has burnt down on the left-hand side. When you go into Todaiji, they have these sacred deer that are around you. And those sacred deer, you can get up close. They will come up. They're looking for handouts. They are considered messengers of the god, and they are allowed to run around freely in the town. Nobody runs over. If the deer are in the way, you wait for them to move. Why? Because these are the messengers of the Buddhist gods that are the transport on some level between us and the Western paradise. So they are absolutely sacred, like the cow was in India. So much so that they will come up and just hang out with you. So this is my little guy at age 4 traveling Japan. He liked Buddhism so much, he became a Buddhist for a week. And here's my daughter at age 6. She wasn't sure what she believed, but she loved animals. She thought it was really cool that they had animals that were messengers of the gods. Inside, this is the Vairochana Buddha. Vairochana, fancy name of calling the Amida Buddha. So this is the Buddha of the Western Paradise. This supposedly is the Buddha that watches over that Western Paradise that becomes the #1 Buddha, the #1 sect of Buddhism in all of Japan. And it is the 3rd largest Buddha in Japan. That's why Daibutsun at Todaiji was literally considered to be the Hall of the Great Buddha. This is what it held. To show you perspective here, the nose I'm going to show you in a moment, his nostril. Where does this sound? There's a way of showing his nostril. These are each about 7 feet tall, these floating Buddhas that surround him. And no surprise, there's 15 of them. To make sure that they're guarding the Western gates so that people that are not faithful to Buddhism don't get in, you're going to have these guardian figures. These are by the artist Unke. And so these 2 individuals, the one on the left up here is defender of the wheel of Dharma, and the one on the right is Amida's, Buddha's personal bodyguard. So this is his personal bodyguard to make sure no one wants to harm the individual. There's a hole in one of the pillars right here that holds up the roof of the building. They have carved out an exact amount. So just to show you how large this Buddha is, that is 1 nostril. So that's the nostril. A hole in the pillar is the size of the Buddhist nostril. And if you can crawl through it, I was too big. It brings luck by crawling through. So the kids line up to crawl through. And then Japan just creates some fantastically gorgeous images, like Kinkakuji, the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is going to be dedicated to Zen, a much more meditative practice than just saying, All hail to the Amida Buddha, for Amida Buddha. So this is really a much more stringent version of Zen, or much more stringent version of Buddhism that we will see that develops in China, called Chan, and sends and actually goes to Korea, called San, and goes to Japan, and there they call it Zen. So Chan, San, and Zen are all the same, and just some gorgeous things that show up. And then we're going to pause after this. So in this, you'll also note the levels. There are 3 levels again here, just like the lovely Sanchi behind me, of Buddhist enlightenment. There's a golden leaf on top, right? The axis mundi. There's 1 story and 2 stories that are gold leaf, symbolizing radiance and light, right? These are the vast majority of people on earth that are attached to material desires. Note the darkness. When you start to figure out your material desires, you move up to this level, say, all right, I got to let them go. I got to let more of them go, and eventually I'm going to attain enlightenment. The Kinkakuji grounds, they do represent the Western paradise of Buddha, and they're supposed to absolutely illustrate the beauty and harmony. And so each floor represents a different type of architecture. So the 3rd floor is the traditional Chinese style, where Zen actually emerges from, called Chan. The 2nd floor, the Tower of Sound Waves, was for warriors and aristocrats who generally started to experience and have an idea of more wealthy individuals on this is how we attain enlightenment. Of course, they could release material desires. They had money to release material desires. The 1st floor is the Chamber of Dharma Waters, the residential style, generally like how poorer people would live. And the building all the way down here is surrounded by water, which is highly reflective, and a gorgeous park that shows up. And this is it during winter. It's just a spectacularly beautiful building in the middle of a lovely park setting. And finally, then, the most significant Buddhist monument that we have in the world, and the largest Buddhist site in the world, is this. This is Borobudur. It's from Java in Indonesia, to show you the extent of Buddhism early on. Note, it's already being made in 790 to 850 CE by architect Gunadarma. We think, we don't know for sure. And so it represents a Buddhist hierarchy like we've seen. So it represents, just like we've seen before, the Hindu Buddhist cosmos of Mount Meru, with a stupa all the way at the pinnacle. Note there are 3 circular levels, 1, 2, and 3, representing enlightenment, and having each one of these as a Buddha in a stupa. There are 5 square levels beneath it, showing you the life of the historical Buddha. And there's a raised platform on the very bottom that separates the temple from the actual earthly realm. So we have sculptures hidden behind sculptures. There are thousands of sculptures here. It's basically a history lesson that we have that can actually show up from Buddhism. So from the ground level, Borobudur is what it looks like. It means many Buddhas, and there are hundreds of Buddhas. So the Buddhas all the way on the top are in these little mini Buddha shells, and they're kind of being hidden. So you don't know what's in each Buddha or what they represent until you see them. It is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. And so the building is more like a university one attends to understand the stories of Mahayana Buddhism, which we'll come back and talk about, than a temple itself. It's kind of like a university book. It's as if the Bible for Buddhism was laid out before you. And it was made with 2 million stones. So if you go all the way up, it's pretty amazing. So if you think about this as a university course, first off, it starts beneath the ground. So there's an underground square platform, the entire building, to make sure it doesn't sink. Then you've got a base encampment, and that's kind of like the foot of the Buddha. Then you've got the body of the Buddha. Then you've got the head of the Buddha. Then you have all the aspects of enlightenment out here. So that's going one orientation. Going up on the other orientation, we have the idea of all these lovely individuals. We have our world of desire at the bottom level, the world of the historical Buddha, the formless world, and finally up here, enlightenment. So it works in both ways. It's a brilliant monument. So it's supposed to construct the golden peak of Mount Meru, which represents all the way up here, which represents all the idea of Buddhism and Hinduism. The pilgrims climb the sacred mountain to achieve spiritual enlightenment, and you have to walk around all of them. Remember, circumambulating. The ritual emulates the journey of the bodhisattvas. Those are Buddhist saints who have attained Buddhahood, but who have decided to stay with us to help other people to attain Buddhahood. So the Borobudur basically takes the form here of a giant mandala. Mandala, basically a creation of the universe, depicting the path of the Bodhisattva or someone who wants to become a Buddha, going up the idea from the concept of samsara all the way to nirvana up at the top. And so it represents that. So level 1 is called Kathmandu, or Kamadhatu, the world of desires, and that's what you're seeing. Level number 2 is the life of the Buddha. And level number 3 represents the entire idea of enlightenment. So it's basically a university in stone. In the life of the Buddha section, you'll see gorgeous artworks here. Life size, these are 5.5 feet tall. So this is Siddhartha himself, basically turning away those worldly desires again. I'm going to give you a crown, I'm going to give you food, I'm going to offer you meat. We have beautiful women, there's animals, and he's turning away from all of it because he knows about the 4 problems of illness and old age and sickness and death that impact people. On the earthly realm, there's punishments for hurting animals. Remember, as I said before, most Buddhists ultimately are going to end up becoming vegetarians because of the process. And that brings us to the divisions of Buddhism, which we'll talk about as we actually move a little bit more towards Japan. Thank you very much and have a lovely, wonderful day. Bye.